Welcome back to the Fan Creations Prop Shop, guys. My name's Chris, and in this video we're going to be doing a full tutorial build for the local shop from the League of Gentlemen. Now, if you don't know what the League of Gentlemen is, take a listen to this.
The League of Gentlemen is a British comedy TV series about the fictional town of Royston Vasey and the bizarre characters that live there. Created by Rhys Shearsmith, Mark Gatiss, Steve Pemberton and Jeremy Dyson, the characters were all played by Shearsmith, Pemberton and Gatiss, with Dyson making occasional small cameo appearances. The League of Gentlemen aired on BBC Two in 1999 and ended in October 2002. This was followed by the movie The League of Gentlemen Apocalypse in 2005 and a 3-episode anniversary special in 2017.
So, now that you're up to speed, let's get this thing built. So, I'm going to basically show the whole thing from start to finish and the methods and techniques I used to achieve the results that I did. If you can't be bothered to watch that and you just want to see the end result, I'll put the timestamp down the bottom, you can skip to that. But, for those of you who would like to see the build and maybe learn a little something, let's get cracking. Okay, so this is where your entire project is going to start, alright? So, Tinkercad, for those of you who aren't aware, is a free piece of software that is a CAD software. So, to give you an idea, let's have a quick look at where the hell my mouse cursor is. I'll show you what that looks like if you're not familiar. If you do have a 3D printer and you're not using Tinkercad, have a go, man. It's a really clever little tool. So that's where you start. You basically go into there and you build all of your bits and pieces that you need in Tinkercad, and then obviously you slice them in your respective slicer, run them through your 3D printer, and then just print them off. So we'll start by doing that. Okay, apologies for the sound in the background, just printing something. Right, so what I've got so far is this. This is the local shop and the windows and all the stuff that I've spent hours and hours on in Tinkercad finally printed. You'll notice that on some of this there are blemishes. I'm not too bothered about that, to be honest, because, you know, it's old brick. I think we're going to use that in the paint job to make it look something lovely. Anyway, so what we're going to do now is we're going to basically prime all of this, but as you can see, some of these are small, teeny tiny little pieces that would go everywhere like that if they get spray painted. The easiest way basically I find to prime and to paint teeny tiny fiddly little things like this without them flying off with the spray paint is to tape them down. So carefully this time, just take a piece, this is just the back of a photo frame, you could use anything, a piece of cardboard, anything that's relatively rigid and that's not going to blow away in the wind. All you need from there, masking tape. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay that sticky side facing up over, which is a bit of a pain to let go of sometimes, but there you go. Then what you're going to do is you're going to anchor that down like so. Okay, do that on both sides, and then you've got a nice sticky little pad, and what you can do with that there is then stick on your windows and they're not going to fly around. Right, so been outside, primed all this, that's worked a treat. However, for now, I'm going to concentrate on painting the actual shop. So we're going to put this to one side and bring this in. So, same again, being primed, oops, didn't really need it, but I stuck that down anyway, same technique. The way we're going to do this is basically by following reference photos. Now I've managed to find a couple of reference photos on Google Images. So looking at that kind of yellowy tinge, the plan is, and trust us, it doesn't look like this colour at all outside of the bottle, because I'm going to paint the whole thing with this first and then dapple on with a sponge the darker kind of grey coloured, so you get that dappled effect. The way we're going to paint these basically, right, is if you take yourself one of these dust sponges with a bit of Scotch Brite on the back, and pull the Scotch-Brite off. So basically just separate it and it'll come away. Right, keep doing that. And with a nice kind of Hollywood sponge. Then york a lump off it, like so. And we're going to use that to paint basically the whole thing. It's one of my biggest gripes with acrylic paints is if you use a brush, most of the time the brush strokes are very obvious. It doesn't always matter, but on something like this, I really don't want there to be obvious brush strokes because it just buggers up the whole scale. So the easiest way to avoid that is to paint with sponges. Dapple it on, basically like that. Right, okay, so we've left this to dry overnight. There are little kind of patches, obviously inside the windows and doors here, and in the little nooks and crannies that I've missed. But to be completely fair, it doesn't really matter because we're going to be building layers of colour anyway. You just want the yellow to kind of show through from underneath, and the grey primer has a stone colour anyway. I mean, that's just primed, so you can get an idea of the colour. It's not too bad. So obviously this is going to get the same treatment. It's going to get painted with the kind of slate grey colour, but for now, again, we'll just concentrate on here. As you can see here, I ended up actually having to mix my own paints because I didn't have the correct one. It's very, very easy and straightforward to do. You don't need any special equipment, literally some paint and a stick. So what I've done here is I've taken a brush and I've nipped the top of it off with a pair of scissors, so it's quite rough, and I'm going to use this brush just right, so now that the house is kind of painted, we're going to leave that to dry for a bit longer. What we're going to concentrate on now is the smaller details. I'm just going to tell that on. Right, so I haven't been able to find the right grey, but I think if I can get a layer off, there we go, then I can make my own. I don't know if you can really see this, but the finish on that, there's no brush strokes on there. Right, first of all, apologies if there's any slamming or banging around. My upstairs neighbour is a prick. So, this is dried now, and as you can see, it gives you quite a nice finish with the yellow kind of showing through. What I'm going to do now is dry brush a bit of that on, just to pick the edges up. What I'm also going to do, get the smallest amount on and just go up on the tiles, just down from the roof. Like that. So it's come time to paint the sign part of this, and to be completely honest with you, this acrylic finish here is a little bit delicate considering I'm using a cheap masking tape. This masking tape's way too sticky and I don't want it to peel off all of the painting work we've already done. So what I have here is just an ordinary piece of photo paper, card, anything rigid will do. What you're going to do is you're going to line that up like that underneath the sign, and then just paint that very gently with a stippling technique, but with a brush this time. And then when you get to the end, obviously replace that bit card do that bit, and so on and so forth. You're not having to mask it and worry about leaving either masking residue or taking the paint off. So let's do that. So this is the back of the shop, and what you're left with is that. So we're going to finish up, do the rest of these, and then we'll put the house together. So for this part of the build, I would recommend that you use a gel type super glue. It's just a lot easier to work with. And don't forget to rough those parts up with sandpaper, just to help with adhesion. The paint on the shop's dry now, on the signs and what have you. So, rather than join the whole thing together in its finished shape sort of thing, like so, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add the details on the inside. So, right now I'm kind of overlaying the reference photos. Now we look at the side windows, which are now circle. They are boarded up with wooden boards. Okay, so what I'm going to use instead are lolly sticks, tongue depressors, stirrers, whatever you want to call them, cheap lolly stick basically things from the craft shop. Any craft shop, literally save lolly sticks if you don't have a craft shop near you or anything like that. And what we're going to do basically is we're going to kind of cut a bit off so it sits over the window like that. I don't know if you can see that because I've got a stupid camera light in my face. No, there we go. So it's going to sit like that. Obviously we'll put a bit of stain on there so it looks a bit more like actual wood. Whoa. Okay, I'm going to hang on to that next time. And what you've got on the other side is essentially, try and turn that light down a bit, a boarded up window sort of thing. So I'm going to do that with the other side. Whoa, lights just fell over. I'm not so sure how well you're going to be able to see this, but what I have in this little pot here is a mixture of black and brown kiwi shoe polish and a little bit of water just to thin it out, right? And you want it to that kind of consistency, because what you're going to do, you're giving it a wash basically. It's a wash, that's what this is. I've reprinted the doors and the windows. I'm going to have to tidy the doors a little bit. So if you can see on the windows, there's more of like a step there, which is more realistic. And the reason I've done this is because the current windows that I have, if you line them up with the shop, are in the background, if that makes sense, so you can see the depth of the window. However, if you now look at the reference photos that I'm putting over the top of this, you'll notice that they're flush with the building. So these smaller ones here, I've measured with the model, and they should, he says optimistically, fit right in. So I'm going to paint them exactly the way I did the first one. You don't need to see me do that. Just know
that the reason they look different is because they are.
I've reprinted the fence as well, and I've made that a little bit thicker, and added these long bits on so you can poke it into the base, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Just out of interest, that's the primer I'm using here, just an ordinary car, rattle bottle primer. So while this is going to dry, what I'm going to do, behind these windows, I'm going to try and make it look like glass, but obviously I don't want anyone to see in. So keep things like this, these little acetate kind of things. This was obviously just for my paintbrushes, but anything acetate is great for making windows. Now, if you don't have acetate lying about, but you just happen to have like a laminator, what you want to do is put a laminating sheet through the laminator with nothing in it, and that'll work as a suitable substitute. So essentially all I'm doing is I'm going to cut out a piece that I need and spray paint one side white. I'm going to do an experiment first though and try hitting it with a clear primer to see if that gives it more of a frosted look, but I have used white spray paint in the past and that works just as well. So let's go and do that. So clear primer did not work, but I've spray painted one side with just cheap white pound shop spray paint, and as you can see on one side that's actually the painted side, and that's not. The not painted side is very glossy, but the main point in this is so it's going to allow light to pass through it and make the windows look a little bit manky from the inside. You can do this a number of different ways, and there's probably a more detailed way to do this, but because of the scale of the model I don't think it's going to have that much of a dramatic effect, but if it does we can always change that. But yeah, good little tip there for making windows.
So the new windows, doors and the new fence have been obviously printed, primed, painted the way the previous ones were. Just for anyone kind of wondering, the little gaps in between the windows and in the shop, the gaps kind of like inside that window frame there, I couldn't get to them with a sponge. I did have to get into them with a brush, but if you do that and then you make a mess of the surface, just go over the surface with a sponge, and that'll sort out any blemishes there, and it'll mean you've got colour everywhere essentially. So anyway, back to this. I'm gonna try and address this a different way. I think I rushed the last one, to be honest, and I've checked the reference photos and the colours didn't match and everything. So all I've done now up to this point is exactly what I did before, but the colours are better. What I'm now doing is I'm taking a little bit of raw sienna, and I'm going to take a fluffy, just a small brush basically, and dry brush the windows.
So just to give you a better look of how that's actually works, there is kind of like a highlighting effect from that dry brushing. And on the doors what I've done, I've taken just a Q-tip, cotton bud, and I've mixed the two colours sort of thing and just dabbed it so it's like mud that's been worked up from people using the doors over and over again. Right, so what I've basically done here is I've taken all of the little windows and obviously the doors that we've printed, and I've laid them down on this little kind of carpet of plywood because it's too like windy and stuff outside to be painting, so I'm going to have to just bite the bullet and get on with it indoors. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to spray it with just a spray adhesive soap. And that's it. And it's already starting to get tacky, so I'm going to take some tweezers here, and what I'm going to do is just gently pick them up and drop them on the shiny side of that acetate.
As you can see, it doesn't really matter where you put these on this acetate sheet, as long as it sticks on good. You're going to cut around them anyway, so they don't have to be lined up perfectly.
That is the effect that we've been going for. That is massively unfortunate, but I can always put that one on the back of the house shop even, and you'll not notice it so much. So, next step coming up. So this is the finished result with the windows and the doors. I'm trying to get the light to kind of bounce off the plastic and see how it looks like glass. And that is that portion done. So we're going to start with the back, and this is the first little window, and honestly I'm just going to try and see what, try doing it this way. Just pressure fit them in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the tiniest amount of Mod Podge in there. So I'm going to do that for the rest of them, and hopefully we can get the rest of this done in the same day. If not, we can always pick it up tomorrow. Not a major drama. So let's carry on doing this. Depending on the tolerances of your 3D printer, some of the windows might be a little bit too tight. So what you want to do is just give them a light sanding, and that'll make them easy to fit. So basically this window that you're looking at now was actually too small for this window, so I ended up having to take a bit of Mod Podge here and glue the window to the top of the window frame, but I'll show you later on how we actually deal with the gap underneath. So I'm going to do that for the rest of the shop, and then we'll stick the shop together. So I'm getting to the very last window on the front of the shop here, and what I've decided to do is on the back of that window is draw the silhouette of a person. It's just scribbled it in with a Sharpie, and then basically when that's fitted to the shop, that's the idea. With the windows all fitted to the shop now, it's time to fit that front door. So what I've done is here, there's actually like a lip around that door, and the reason I've done that is so you put a bead of glue. Your glue is up to you. I prefer Mod Podge for stuff like this. Because if anything goes wrong, you can always it's a good bond, but it's a light bond, so you can always push that door off and do something later on if needs be. But what you're going to do is just push that into place, and that's your door fitted. There we go. There's your front door. So we're going to put the back door in the exact same way, so we'll just put that there. And we'll get the back door here. That, by the way, I added a little bit of that shoe polish that I mixed up before to the boarded up wall thing. And that is how your back door's looking there. So I want to leave that to dry, and then when we come back we're going to hopefully have the last little bits of this corner clamp done, and we're going to stick the house together. God damn it, the shop, not the house. And then we can start working on the base. So I was having a little bit of a think, and I decided that I like the idea of having David being the only one illuminated in the house, but obviously in order to do that, I still want a little bit of residual light as if the light's on in that room in the building, but only that room. So what I'm going to do is I've got some adhesive vinyl here, and all I'm going to do is stick it over all of the windows from the inside. So from the outside you still have the glass effect with the acetate, you still have the white, so it's, you know, you can't see all the way through, but one, it's going to fill that gap there which you can see through, so it'll now look like that. It's a little harder to see. And two, if I do that exact same thing on this side, but leave that window exposed, you'll see the effect I'm going for. When it actually came time to putting the vinyl on in order to block out some of those windows, I decided actually that, as well as having David upstairs in the room, I wanted Edward and Tubbs to be kind of downstairs in the shop itself. So as you can see, I'm cutting out the top window here. I also cut out around the door, and as you look from the front of the shop, the bottom right window as well. You'll only really see David. Okay, so the time's come to glue this all together. I did print this nifty little corner jig from Thingiverse, and it works absolutely fine, but we've got little things that poke out, steps and whatever. and that just makes it that little bit more awkward to get in the right angle. So I'm just going to take 2 pieces of that and improvise. Seems like a bit of a waste of time, which it was, but that's the thing about crafting and making stuff. If you're not making mistakes, you know, you're not doing it right, because it's a learning experience. It always will be. Okay, so this is where we're at so far with the local shop. Apologies for the lighting. So that is where we are so far. So, the next step is to make the base. Right, so the foundation of the base is going to be this deep box frame. You're going to flip that over and you're going to lift up these little tabs here. And if you struggle to lift the back off, which I often do, get yourself a pokey tool. Keep this, very important. Now we've got the glass. Now, as you can see here, there's a little frame here. This one, no, it's not. Is it? No, it's not glued in. There you go. So, sometimes they are. If it is glue, it's often hot glue. You can wedge it off again with your pokey stick, a screwdriver, something like that. But again, if you're putting pressure on it and that's glass, be careful. Right, so once you've got rid of the glass, take out all these little bits of like plywood, whatever the hell they've used to create that depth. Keep that to one side along with this, and we'll paint that later. So what we're going to concentrate on now, that rigid backing plate is what we're interested in. We're going to build on this side of it for that reasons. If you can peel these off without leaving a residue, awesome sauce. If you can, you're a goddamn Jedi, because no one else can. As you can see, I've removed that sticker after a full encyclopedia of swearing. So we're basically going to take some insulation foam and build on top of that. So the foam I'm using here is a 10mm extruded polystyrene, not to be confused with expanded polystyrene, which is the white stuff. It's fantastic for making model bases, and it's quite a cheap material to get a hold of. Right, I'm about to go outside and give this a quick coat of black paint, just a matte black paint. And what I'm going to do beforehand is I'm just going to take this 400 grit, and it's been used before, it's a bit of a fairly weathered bit, but we're just going to rush that surface up just a tiny little bit. Right, so the paint's just about dry on this. It's touch dry now, so it's dry enough to do what we need to do. And what we're going to do is turn that over, okay, and we're going to put that foam right in here. Fits in like that, nice and flush. And then I'll leave that like that. I'll spray that with spray adhesive, come in, stick it on there, weight that down, and then we'll take that back out and build our base on that. Right, so just going, that's starting to get tacky now, so what we're going to do is drop that into the back of the frame the way it belongs anyway. Push that right up against your foam, and we're going to weigh that down with pretty much everything in here. Right, that last plan didn't work, so I ended up just taking neat Mod Podge and just literally painting the whole thing on here and then sticking that board on. So if you have any bother with your spray adhesive, just use a different glue. So it's the next day and all of this is dry. I've pressed these between some books after I put that Mod Podge on, and that has worked beautifully. So this is also dry. I'm going to just flip that over, And very carefully do the same with this. Flip that over, and you're going to push that, or well, not push it, but you're going to basically insert that. That then sits level like that. Now, what we're going to do is, you see we've got that recess there. That is for a battery pack because we're going to drill through this to mount an LED. However, the first thing we're going to do is take a pencil here, and we're going to mark where the frame meets the frame like that. Okay. And the reason for that is when we put the static grass and all the base and everything on that, it's going to add some volume essentially, so we want to avoid that bit. So in order to create the ground texture here, I'm actually going to use a wall filler. You could use, and generally would use, something like sculptor mold if you're going to build a diorama. It's a really good product for building terrain essentially. This is just a very basic uneven ground texture we're going for, so a basic cheap wall filler works really, really well. So at this point what you can see is I'm dabbling the sponge on the same kind of technique as we did when we painted. Start light, but then obviously gradually get a little bit heavier with this, and all you're trying to do is create a natural texture essentially. So basically what I've done here is I've put the shop onto some card, drew around that, cut it out, and I'm now pressing that into the wall filler. What that's going to do is give us a flat surface to actually mount the shop to the model. Right, so I've left this over 2 days as it goes, so this is all dry now. I've peeled off that cardboard. It's not perfect, but again, it doesn't matter because the house is going to sit on top of that. So what I've done here is I've mixed up a bit of raw umber and natural sienna paint just to get that mud colour. You're just going to cover this whole thing. Right, so all the paint's dry now on that. I've remasked the edges off, the bits that's going to be on the inside of the frame. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do the ground texture. So I've just got some Mod Podge and water mixed together, and we're just going to paint that over the whole thing, like so. Really slap it on there. Once you've done that, you've painted that with your watered down Mod Podge. You can use PVA glue or wood glue or anything like that. What I've got in here is some dry dirt, just random dry dirt. Literally just go out and grab a handful of dirt out off the ground, and some light grout powder, and you're going to sift that through like a stocking. Just put that over a spray paint lid, pinch a bobble off the missus, and sift it like so. Right, so once you've done that, what you want to do is you want to saturate the whole thing in isopropyl alcohol. Just give that a complete misting. It's going to look quite drastic, but don't worry about it too much. Right? Then what you're going to do is you're going to cover the whole thing in scenic glue. This is just 3 parts water, 1 part glue, and a couple of drops of dish soap, very liquid, whatever. And literally just drench that. It doesn't matter if it looks ridiculously ruined now, because all that stuff is going to dry and you'll be absolutely fine. It takes a while to dry, but that's alright. It's actually really important that you don't skip that step of the isopropyl alcohol. You can use something called wet water, but either method you use, what that's going to do is that's going to actually break the surface tension of that grout powder and surface dirt, and that's going to allow the scenic glue to actually soak in. Right, so we're going to start on the grass now, that the base is all dry. The base is currently looking like this. So we've got our earth on there, bit of muck. So what we'll do is you take a bit of greaseproof paper. This, I didn't have any, so yeah, I pinched a bit from Dixon's. You just want to get a little bit of your masking tape, and you want to secure that down to something metal. A bacon tray will do, but this is like a set that the missus got for Christmas. I'm pretty sure you'll be able to find a suitable substitute, but essentially all you're doing is you're taping that down. You can just take a piece of wood and drill some holes in. What I've done here is I've 3D printed like a little template with some different size holes in, and all you're going to do is you're going to lay that over your greaseproof paper like that. Secure that down so it's not going to move straight onto your tin, whatever the hell it is you're using. So that's the basic setup. What you're then going to need is a static grass applicator. Now, there is plenty of videos out there of how to make your own. I've got to be honest with you, this one is a cheap chatty eBay one that I got for about 12 quid. It works, but it's not ideal. And what we're using here is a 10mm static grass. Alright, so do yourself a favour, don't touch that bit, like the actual mesh. You will electrocute yourself, as I did yesterday doing a tester for this, and trust us when I tell you, it sucks when that happens. And what you're going to take is Mod Podge, PVA glue, something along those lines. Wood glue actually works well, wood PVA glue. And all you're going to do, just cut the end off a Q-tip here, is take like that, and you're just going to put like a dab of glue in each one of these little kind of hole things there. And what we're also going to do is leave a couple of random tufts. That's going to be a bit of a random shape there to show you what it happens. Earth that down. So as you can see, that's only halfway done, but you can see how the grass has kind of stood upright almost. What we're eventually looking for is a bunch of these, like little tufts that'll sit upright like so. You place that around the model. So we're going to keep on making them, and then we'll add some grass to the actual model. Alright, so I left these for a while, and I think the glue's dry. The way you pick these up is you just literally grab them and just pull them off your greaseproof paper, and then there's a little tuft of grass. That did not work, so I think we'll clean that off later and rethink that idea. Right, so before we do anything else, what I've done is I've cut another cardboard section out to cover over where the shop's going to be, so there's no grass there. And the grass we're using, same colour as the tuft there, that's 10mm grass, this is 6mm grass, I believe it's summer grass. And I'm just going to load that into the static grass applicator for now. I've got a mix here of some glue. All this is Mod Podge and water. It's about 3 parts glue to 1 part water. So I actually ended up rethinking this little part here. What you can see is doing is adding a bit of glue and then adding the tufts and then static grassing over the top of that. But as you can see from this next clip here, when it comes to adding the actual grass, it becomes a real pain in the arse to add that glue around the tufts. What I ended up doing basically was removing the tufts, adding the glue, then doing the tufts again, and then doing the shorter grass over the top of that. So once you're at that stage, what you want to do is take this end of a paintbrush and just kind of randomly tease the grass a bit, because yes, you still want it to be kind of realistic standing up, but you don't want all of it to be perfectly standing up, otherwise it just doesn't look real. It's too perfect basically. So you just want to mess it up a little bit. No, don't take the piss with it, you know, don't ruin it. Don't smash it back into the glue. We'll give it a rough up. So essentially what you're left with is, in fact, like that. It looks a hell of a lot better in person, trust me. We're going to let that dry and come back to that tomorrow to add the extra details. Just been thinking, while that's drying, I've pulled the cardboard off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some tweezers here and I'm actually going to remove some of that static grass coming up towards the door of the shop, meaning that I can make that into like mud, but it's where the kind of path towards the door has been, for want of a better phrase, kind of worn away. Absolute worst case, it looks shit. I'm going to put some more there, but for now we're just going to leave that to dry and crack on tomorrow. I do apologise, I've just completely realised that I forgot to film this bit. It's basically just a little bit of adding kind of texture. This, what I've done is I've added a bit of ground foam here, just to add that with a bit of PVA, sprinkle on some of this, and what this is basically, this is dried leaves and tree bark that I've had through a blender, and then I've sieved it, and that's what you use for your ground texture. It acts as like broken up leaves. I've also put a little bit of flocking on, I don't know if you can see this up close, to act as kind of like leaves. So these look like little bushes from a distance, so you're gonna be looking something like that for your scenery. But it's going to look a lot better when all the glue's dried and the shop's on and it's lit up and it's finished. Right, so what we're doing now is the fun bit. Everything's dried now. We're going to take off the tape and fit that into the base just to see how it looks. So this bit actually ended up not being fun at all. Earlier in the video I mentioned I was using a cheap masking tape. I would definitely recommend against this if you're going to use this technique to kind of mask off your base and your grass, because this stuff sticks terrible. I had a real nightmare getting this off, which I'm not going to make you endure, but just bear that in mind if you're going to do that yourself. Go for a higher quality masking tape. So with it sitting in the base, that's what we've got so far. I have to say we're looking pretty damn good. So I'm just putting a piece of wood underneath the model here so I can drill a hole in it, and we're just going to drill that hole through so we can mount the LED inside the shop. Right, so we're going to put the LED inside the shop now. So what we've got here is a warm white LED that's pre-wired with a resistor, little push button switch, a 3-volt battery box which does have its own power switch, but we can always just glue that in place, some heat shrink, some wire, some solder and a soldering iron. Pretty sure you don't need us to explain that too much. Make a circuit and give yourself enough wire to work with. So as you'll see in a moment, I actually had to replace this 3-volt battery holder with a 9-volt battery holder. That LED will take it, but the shop just didn't look right with such a dim light inside of it. So what I've done is I wired that switch to some extra wire. I've cut myself a hole in here, inside this frame. And to accommodate for that, on the other side of the model, I've carved out a little bit of foam as well. And what we're going to do with that is mount the switch here, and then we're going to wire all the LED up from the inside. Now that that's fitted, like so, that's going to run the light. So just a quick note, inside the house, god damn it, the shop. I've ended up having to put a 9-volt power source to the LED because it just wasn't bright enough to light it up. What I've also done is I've filled the inside with holographic vinyl to try and assist that light. So you can use, again, any glue you want to use here. What I would advise is just a small bead of Mod Podge or PVA glue. That's enough to hold the bond, and you're just going to do that on all the other signs on the shop. Right, so all the signage has been done on your local shop, and that's that bit pretty much finished for now. So we're going to put that on one side and finish up this base. So as you can see, I've placed it in the frame, and that is how I got that switch to kind of sit. I want to be able to attach the base permanently to the frame before I add things like the fence and the barrels and what have you. Just purely because that's going to be a bit easier. So the way I'm going to do that, to be honest with you, is I'm going to cover the edge here in a bit of glue. I'm going to put super glue in the corners and a bit of Mod Podge on the edges here. And I'm going to stick that to the inside of the frame. So I think what we're going to do here is so, of course, once you've put that in the frame, you want to put something underneath it like that, so you're going to have permanent pressure pushing the base into the frame, essentially. So, we're going to wait for that to set, and once all the glue's dried, we're going to then add the lights. So, what I've actually done, since I've put the 9-volt battery holder on this, it means that the model itself actually doesn't have enough room under here to accommodate the battery itself. So, if I was to put that there, you can see it's uneven. So what I've done is I've printed and painted these little corner display feet, and what I've done is I've taken the corner out of it so they can sit like so, and that's going to raise the model up. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the LED in that position, and we're just going to keep it there with a bit of hot glue. The time has come, moment of truth. So in order to actually attach the shop to the base, all I've done is I've run a thick bead of Mod Podge glue around the bottom of the shop and just push that into the base itself. Again, if you don't have Mod Podge, wood glue, PVA glue, something like that's a really good substitute. So I'm going to let that set for a bit, and then when we come back, all the little details are going to get glued on. So before it actually gets stuck down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this little trough, we've weathered this a bit, but I'm going to give it a little bit of a kind of moss look. Unfortunately, my upstairs neighbour was so noisy you actually couldn't hear my explanation of what I was doing here. Basically what I'm doing is layering the paint, so layer it on and then take it off and just keep repeating that until it looks right. So, don't know if you can see very well, it's got a little bit of green kind of slimy looking on it. And I'm going to leave that to dry. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to come in, we're going to permanently attach these little golden feet, put all the little details on. So what I'm doing at the minute is I want to put these golden feet on the bottom. As you can see with this one, I've sanded away a little bit of the paint here. It's just to help it adhere to the underside of the frame. So I'm going to fit this one, see how that goes. Just do that one by one. And I'm attaching these with a little bit of that gel super glue. I've got a bit of black PLA filament which I've bent into that little kink, and that is going to replicate the drain pipe, which I've just noticed I've missed out on. So we'll add a barrel now to the bottom of that. Before I fit this, which is what we painted yesterday, I'm actually going to fill that with a little bit of clear resin, so it looks like it's got water in it. Okay, so what I'm using here is just the leftover clear casting resin and hardener that I've got lying around. It's a 1-for-1 mix. So when it actually comes to mixing your resin, what you want to do here is make sure you actually scrape around the sides of your containers. Obviously you do that when you're scraping that resin and the hardener out, but when you're mixing both together,
scrape around the sides as well, just to make sure you get equal amounts of the resin and the hardener. You could let it stand for a bit, or you take a heat gun, a lighter, something like that. That'll help you pop any surface bubbles. Nip your cup into a point like that. It's going to make that much easier to pour. It is in there, trust us. So we're going to leave that to set to one side. I'm going to have a cup of coffee, I think. Right, so overnight the resin has dried. So that is what our little trough looks like so far. Okay, so we're going to glue that in exactly as it is in the reference photos. And again, we're just using a glue, super glue this time. I've got myself a bit of Loctite because I've run out of the other stuff. So put a canny old whack of it on there. Like that. So, now that the trough's in place, we're going to put some more of these little barrels in there. And then that's this side finished with. And we're going to do that exactly the same way. So the reason that resin looks white is because I've covered it in Mod Podge. It's just to try and make ripples, but it didn't really work. So that side of the shop is kind of done now. I'll show you again when that PV is dry to show you the effect I was going for. But we're going to now move on to the final details on this side. And if you've noticed, there's a little pig pen. I have 3D printed the three sides of this pig pen, and obviously that's the Royston Vasey sign, which I completely forgot to paint. So we're just going to do this exactly the way we do with the sponges and the paint. So let's do that. Right, so now that they're painted, we're going to leave them to dry and put them to one side. So what I have here is a bit of, honestly I don't really know what to call this. It's the kind of stuff you get veils and dress stuff from wedding dresses. That's where I got it from, like a fabric shop. And we're going to use that to act as like the chicken wire, the mesh inside that little pig pen. So I've already done this for a preview for the last time I did this, so I've got a bit lying around. What you do is you basically take that, like, hang on a sec. You take like a little bit of it like that and you dust it with silver spray paint. Don't really cake it on because it'll collect in between those little kind of circular holes there and it just looks shockingly bad. So just give it a quick dust and what you end up with is that, which looks a lot more like an actual kind of fencing metallic mesh there. So the paint's dried on this little pig pen here, and obviously we've got our little mesh here, and what we're going to do is we're going to basically attach the mesh to the pig pen and then tidy that up before we connect it all together. So all I'm doing here is taking a bit of brown shoe polish and I'm dabbing that on the kind of silver painted legs of this Royston Vasey sign. I'm going to dab off the excess with the other end of that Q-tip, and that's going to give you the weathered look we're looking for. So I've 3D printed this little doohickey here, and it's quite a clever little tool. I'll put the link for this in the description if you're interested. It's on Thingiverse. And what it is, it's for taking pieces of foil, or in this case, popular carbonated non-adult beverages, and what you do is cut a piece of the can and then you sit that in there like so, and then when you turn this little lever, it makes a cool sound for one, and what that gives you is corrugated iron or wriggly tin. Now obviously you've still got the branding on the other side, but what I want to do is give that a quick blast with some silver spray paint, and it won't matter because I'm going to rest it that way down anyway. So let's go and do that. So that's been dusted with a bit of silver spray paint, so that's the painted side and that's not. So you can see that's worked pretty well. So if you just want to sponge on a bit of burnt sienna paint here, that's going to act as rust, and you want to do that on the non-painted side of that can. So we'll take a really sharp blade, got a scalpel blade, X-Acto knife, whatever you've got is suitable. Again, you don't really need me to tell you this, but be careful. Hold that down and just make your cut as close to the actual printed part as you can. So we've got all our components. We've got the front and sides and the roof. That's all that came out of the pig pen. And we've got some parts of our corner jig. I'm going to try and use that in order to make this perfect. Where's my glue? There. So just to pre-warn you, this step in the build sucks so hard. Just try and be patient with it. Okay, it's done, but after much swearing, that is what we're left with. And I swear I think I've just broke it there again. No, I didn't. Thank God for that. Right, so let's put this on the model, and that'll give us the bearings for put the rest of the barrel and what have you on. So, final few details here. I've printed this little box here, and what that's for is to hold a square battery, your 9-volt battery there. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach that to the underside so the battery sits like that, and it's just a little bit more tidy, a little bit more classy, basically. So let's do that. We're literally just going to attach this with a bit of glue. What we're going to do now is the Royston Vasey sign. So I've printed that off. And we're going to take our little road sign. What you're left with there is Royston Vasey road sign. So the way we're going to fit this, we're going to do it kind of here-ish. So I understand it's not to scale. The whole point in this is so it looks like you're stood closer to the sign looking at the shop. So basically the way you do this is you're going to pick your spot, about there, see, and then you're just going to put a few small holes in. So in hindsight, I probably would have made these wires a touch shorter, but it's not a major drama. Once it's slipped into its little holder there, it's still neat and tidy. Guys, thanks so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider hitting the like button and maybe even subscribe if you'd like to see more. Incidentally, what I'm going to do in the next video, hopefully, is turn this little bad boy, little Mario pullback toy, into another little diorama. So, if you'd like to see that, obviously, join us in the next video. And never forget, guys, no matter where you are in the world, always be free and proud to live and love your fandom.